Last week we saw how God's loving kindness is showed by God to others. This week we'll see how steadfast love and loyalty is shown from one person to another person, coming right up. Well, hey there, I'm Dominic, and Lighthouse is a youth ministry at Austin Chinese Church where we desire for every student to personally experience the light of Christ and for students to shine the light of Christ into your spheres of influence. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. And if you're benefiting from watching Lighthouse videos, click to subscribe on the Lighthouse channel. Last week, we looked at examples of how God shows his Hesed, his loving kindness, his steadfast love towards people. If you missed the lesson, you can click here. What's most important is that we remember that God keeps his covenants with us as a defining attribute of himself. God is a steadfast God in his love, loyal in his commitment as part of his fundamental nature. Our goal for revisiting Hesed from a different perspective today is to pick up the nuance in the meaning when words are often lost in translation, and in this instance from Hebrew to English. So we're going to take a closer look at the Hebrew word Hesed again. So come along with me. The Hebrew root word for Hesed shows up 288 times in the Old Testament, and so anytime a word that appears that many times and carries this much weight, it's important that we understand it well so we can appreciate what the Old Testament authors are trying to teach us every time they use it. Hesed can be defined as loving kindness, steadfast love, loyalty, and faithfulness. Now, Hesed, loving kindness, or steadfast love, which are the most common translations, can be used to express these concepts coming from people or from God. Today, we're going to focus on the nuances of what man's Hesed means. When it comes to man's Hesed, we can express loving kindness or steadfast love in one of two ways. First, it can be steadfast love shown to another person, like often in a peer-to-peer type of situation. Or secondly, it can be steadfast love or loyalty shown especially to those who are in low positions. These are the two main ways Hesed is used to convey man's steadfast love to another person. When it comes to man showing Hesed, steadfast love, loyalty, or kindness towards other people, this is the most common way of a peer-to-peer expression of loyalty. Here in 1 Samuel 20, Jonathan, who is King Saul's son, meets with David, who happens to be on the run from Jonathan's dad, trying to hunt him down to prevent David from becoming the king. Yet this plays out like a Michael Bay movie scene where Jonathan and David face each other mano a mano in a field of wheat that's blowing in this low angle 360 sweep. It says, "If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever." And the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. But instead of an epic battle, Jonathan asks David for his loyalty and love despite what his father is doing to him. And notice in verse 14 that Jonathan requests that David show him God's steadfast love and loyalty. This would be an example from last week when God shows his steadfast love to man. But here it is paralleled as Jonathan asks David to show him steadfast love and loyalty. See how God's steadfast love and covenantal love is established and rooted in reality first. Then Jonathan asks David to display God's Hesed, God's steadfast love to him as a result of David having first experienced it himself. In 2 Samuel 16:17, Absalom, who is David's son, questions the loyalty of one of David's friends that he has to David. And Absalom says to Hushai, "Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?" Again, notice how it's a person-to-person sense of loyalty and love that's being used here. And lastly, in Proverbs 19:22, it says, "What is desired in a man is steadfast love, and a poor man is better than a liar." Here, the author of Proverbs is trying to tell us that loyalty and love that comes from a person who is poor is better than loyalty and love that comes from someone whose nature is false and deceitful. As a variant of people showing loyalty and kindness to each other, here we see examples of when man shows loyalty and loving kindness to those who are in low or needy position. Genesis 24 sets the scene when Abraham has sent his servant to find a wife for his son Isaac. Rebekah does exactly as what Abraham's servant is instructed to observe, and in his conversation with Rebekah's father, he says, "Now, if you are going to show steadfast love and faithfulness to my master, tell me, and if not, tell me that I might turn to the right hand or to the left." Here, Abraham and his servant are in a lower position as they are asking Bethuel for his daughter to marry Isaac. In Job 6, Job says that he who withholds kindness, loving kindness, from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. While it's clear that this sort of kindness happens from one person to another, it's not clear from the English translation that the kindness being withheld is towards someone who is in significant need. This is why Job says that the person does not fear God, because if he or she did, then they would show a needy person the steadfast love that they truly are in need of and would benefit from. Lastly, God shares what he requires of people. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. In Micah 6:8, again, we have another example of how showing love and loyalty isn't a scenario where you use people to advance and to get ahead, but actually where God flips the values of the world and he says a requirement, a trademark of my people will be people who are just, who show loyalty and steadfast love to others, and those who have a humble attitude. And here particularly, God is talking about a kindness, a loyalty, a steadfast love, in particular to those who are low or needy. This is why so often God speaks about the importance of loving the poor, the marginalized, and the disenfranchised with the love of God. As I reflect on the word Hesed as a whole, it's clear to me that we think of God's steadfast love first as the orienting point for us. It's the central theme. We must recall that any love or loyalty or faithfulness we can display to another person is first and foremost rooted in God's Hesed, his steadfast love, his covenantal love. And apart from Hesed being rooted in God, any attempt at expressing loving kindness, loyalty, and faithfulness are all empty-handed attempts. Psalm 118:8 says, "It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man." Then in response to God's steadfast love, his loving kindness, his loyalty, and his faithfulness, we are called to respond by demonstrating and showing everything we have experienced from God to those who are needy and in low position. This person doesn't have to be homeless or less well off as you financially. It can be a friend who's not a Christian and they are needy for the gospel of Jesus to show them the love of God that they desperately need to change and transform their lives. In all, understanding how Hesed is God's deepest expression of love and loyalty and how we can show Hesed to one another are powerful examples of God's love and how it can be received and then shown to others. Here are today's discussion questions. How is the idea of Hesed rooted in God first? What is it about God's Hesed that ought to encourage Christians to show steadfast love to those who are low or needy? And third, what's one way we can reflect on God's steadfast love, his Hesed, to someone in your life that needs to receive steadfast love from you? We've got some really exciting news to share with you. First of all, we want to let you know that beginning on Sundays, starting on July 11th, we are going to be back for in-person small groups. We're really excited to be the first ministry back in person, and it's all thanks to the hard work of Josh as our deacon, all the counselors, and Pastor Pat. So how's it going to work, you ask? We're going to have you do many of the same things you've been doing for the last year and a half or so. Wear a mask, stay socially distanced from other groups, have safe sanitary practices, and reduce capacity in indoor spaces. Our plan has been approved by our church's COVID task force. And so, on the most part, your counselor will be at church and we will continue to meet with your small groups, but in a hybridized format, meaning you'll still meet with those in person as well as those who are at home meeting online. Additionally, we will spread out all the small groups between Johnson and Carrie so you will be distanced from one another indoors. Also, while we are not all the way back quite yet, I hope you appreciate coming back in person and seeing your friends and growing with God together again in person. Our second exciting news we want to share with you is that Youth Retreat is on. Go tell your parents and register at acc.church/youthretreat. All the details can be found on the registration page. We will have COVID safety protocols in place, but we're excited nonetheless to host Youth Retreat this year and to see how God will move at Retreat. One thing to mention is that we are asking you to consider self-quarantining prior to Retreat because we certainly do not want to pass COVID along to anyone at Retreat. Everything you need to know can be found at acc.church/youthretreat. And lastly, we won't have small groups over the 4th of July weekend on both Friday and Sunday, so enjoy your time with your family. Hey there again. I truly hope and pray that understanding Hesed from both God's perspective and from how we can show steadfast love, loving kindness, and loyalty is such an important concept for us to know and live out. Whenever you see the word steadfast love in the Old Testament, ask who is demonstrating it and what is the context it's being used in. In the end, any love and faithfulness we can show is rooted in God's Hesed first. But our ability to show faithfulness and love is deeply connected to loving those who are in need. I hope we recognize that God's character above all else and how we can understand God's love. Make sure you stay connected with us online at acclighthouse.org and on Instagram at acclighthouse. Make sure you're checking our Instagram constantly for more updates and feedback. If you want to stay connected and catch up on a previous lesson, you can click up here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.